Xavier, beef stews for dinner with garlic toast. That's what's for dinner. Yes, it is. Don't make that face. Do not. Why? Why is it beef stew for dinner? Because that's delicious food that mommy put together. Because mommy loves you and wants to see you grow big and strong, so she made you beef stew.
Why?
Because mommy wants to make sure you don't just eat other food for dinner that won't give you energy.
Why?
Because mommy loves you very much. Why does mommy love you very much? Is that what you're asking me? Because you came out of mommy and mommy loves you very, very much. That's why.
Why?
Do you even know what why means?
Welcome to Chatting with Casey with your host, Casey Palmer. Episode 3, Give Me Some Room to Fail. Welcome to Chatting with Casey, the podcast about family, food, fashion, and faith, and travel, and tech, and whatever else I can manage to cram in an hour or so at a time. It's finally summer in the city here in Toronto, and the 2.8 million here could not be happier. I'm seeing neighbors I thought lost to the long winter of 2018, and enjoying things like food truck Thursdays at work and any excuse to have a milkshake on the porch. Shout out to Hamilton Beach. It's a much needed change of pace from the self-imposed hibernation we usually go through for half the year or more. But how ready are we for the summer? We can plan out our vacation time and make a million promises of cookouts to come, but can your life suddenly handle a shift in the balance with even more trying to creep onto a plate that's already spilling over? I'm not sure mine can. A video Mike Reynolds shared this week, the dad behind the Everyday Girl Dad brand for those not familiar with him, got me thinking about what I've given up to make it this far. Nights spent perfecting content or nights not connecting with the friends I've known since forever. The mental space I've used up mulling over the next piece of content is space I could have used thinking up fun ways to spend time with others. I've isolated myself in my mad quest for success, and it's likely time I look at my priorities and make a few changes. Stuff like this are the things we often gloss over as men, thinking everything will just sort itself out. And it most definitely will not, unless we make a conscious choice to improve things, have the tough conversations, make the necessary sacrifices. If something feels off, it needs fixing. It's okay if we're not perfect. And it's this kind of thinking that laid the foundation for The Dad Within, the talk I gave a few months back at the first ever Parenting 101 conference over in Kelowna, BC. It was an amazing experience as a keynote speaker alongside Alison Schaefer, who definitely had more structure to her talk. But back home, people were really curious about what I talked about while I was away. Well, wonder no more. Now presented for your listening pleasure is The Dad Within, my take on what goes on inside a dad's head and what we can all learn from it. I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to start my keynote with a bit of an apology, one to Lisa and Dale, because I know I gave them those end of heart attacks this morning as everything went wrong with my computer and everything, and I tried to get things organized. But I'm here now. This is what counts, right? Also, my keynote is not as memorized as I would like it to be because I was busy parenting this week as I tried to finish things up. So as Dale mentioned, I was in Dad 2.0 over in New Orleans last week, which was really fun. It's really interesting going to a dad blogger conference where it focuses more on dad than blogger, because I was thinking it's going to focus more on blogger. I'm like, I'm going to learn how to be a better blogger. This is going to be amazing. And it's like, oh, we're talking about feelings and all these things inside that I'm not ready to deal with. I was not equipped for this conference. So after getting over that and learning to be a human being again and coming back to taking the week off work and get everything ready for the keynote, both my kids decided to have the flu, because that's the thing they do, right? They're 4 and 2, and they really can't, make their own chicken noodle soup and things like that. So, I got home Sunday evening, Monday, Tuesday, I'd be at home for 2 hours, and then get a call from school, bring! yeah, pick up your kid. He's not doing so well. And then, just making sure they're okay and that they are feeling loved and cuddled and all the things because that's important. That's what you do as a parent. And then we got him up and running again in 2 days. And then, on the Thursday, bring, yeah, your other son. Yeah, he's not looking so well. I'm like, you guys need to stop playing in such close proximity to each other. I cannot deal with this, but hey. So, basically, there's a keynote. It's good, I swear. It's well written. You'll love it. It'll be amazing. It's just not all in here, so bear with me as we go through the morning, and we'll make this work. Sound good? Yeah. Okay, cool. Excellent. Ahem. So, my keynote this morning is called The Dad Within, the man the world really rarely gets to see. And it all started, for me, the story that I want to share this morning starts with a vivid image I have of me at my parents' house on the floor, refusing to get up until my dad was willing to hear what I was telling him. I was, we've had a, interesting upbringing, and I was very much just kind of like, I was trying to get my point through to him. He wasn't listening, and I was just there on the floor. I was like, no, I'm not getting up until you hear me and you listen to me. And I was 27 at the time, so. Yeah. It's a lifelong journey between a fatherhood, and I'll get into it a bit more later. But it was the moment where on my side it was like I wanted to be heard. On his side it was like I really thought we got through this by this point in your life already, but we'll figure this out. So, good morning, ladies, gentlemen, mom and dads of all ages. My name is Casey Palmer, and you probably have no idea of who I am. You'll notice that immediately that I'm not coming to you with the same level of credentials and expertise as Allison, for example, which is fine. She's a third-generation parent educator. I'm a third-generation drama queen through my mother's side. And she has 20-plus years of counseling experience, and I probably have the same amount of time logged in on video games, so my hand-eye coordination is really, really good. But really, the only thing that makes me an expert on dads is the fact that I am one, and I'm one of the only men out there in the digital space in Canada talking about it. There's not really a huge ongoing conversation about fatherhood, and I just kind of, I don't want to say I fell into it, but that's pretty much what happened, actually. I fell into it. But I'm big in numbers. Math, stats is my background. And let's think about this. Let's really talk about these numbers. So, if you look at the last Canadian census, there's about 35 35.2 million people from coast to coast across Canada. And of those 35 million, 9.84 million are Canadian families of various sizes. If you break that down, you have 8.227 million couple families, 1.613 million lone parent households who I have no idea how they pull it off. Kudos to you. That is amazing, because I know I would be I'd be bald right now. If I was the only one at home, this would be all gone. I'd have to pull it out like after a few days. It would be bad, but right now it's still here, and I'm trying to keep it as long as possible. My dad has a bald crown, and I'm like, I don't want it. So anyway, and then of those, I'm going to just say, I'm going to just assume that in these numbers, everyone's a heterosexual couple, because homosexual couples, the same-sex couples, make 1% or less of the actual total population, which may be a surprising number, and that's I guess why they work so hard to be heard, because there's so few. But, and half those families have no kids of the families I mentioned, so you're down to 4.204 million couples with kids, or 2.102 million dads. So, and then add the lone parent families of those 350,465 individuals. Of those, 22% of those lone parent families are male. So, 1/5 of lone parent families are guys. And you combine those all together, you get 2.452 million dads across the country, give or take a few thousand. So with 2.452 million dads across the country, how many people do you think there are online talking about fatherhood? 5, wow. That's a really depressing number. 5 people, yeah, okay. It's not much better. 76, 80, it's really a low number, and of those, there's probably a dozen or two who are actively talking about their fatherhood stories from every conceivable angle. And so, really, what that tells me is that, the other 99.9995% of fatherhood stories are not being represented in what's being put out there. We have a few of us who are talking about it and trying to ensure that it's represented, but there's not the full spectrum of fatherhood conversations that there could be. And we're talking about everyone from, your regular nuclear dad, single dad. You have dads of multiples. You have dads of color. You have dads in same-sex relationships. You have so many different narratives, and we're really not touching on it all that much. So it's basically at a point where there's way more opportunity with telling stories and working with brands and things like that than there are dads to tell them. So all the dads in the room, if you're looking for something in your non-existent free time to do, blogging's good, I'm just saying. But the reason why, it's a thing where we just realize that dads generally don't talk in the same way. We don't have the same level of community and conversation that others may have. And I say that knowing that my wife, for example, she has a Facebook group for moms in our neighborhood that has 5,000 plus moms in it. And they talk about everything. Everything. They are the third parent in my household. This hive mind of Facebook moms. I give myself a quota of one major opinion per month that I can have in my household, where I'm like, this is the one thing I believe is true, and I'm going to stand by this and fight till the death on it. And usually goes well, but if the hive mind does not agree with my mind on this one, then I'm just kind of like, all right, I can't win against 5,000 people, fine. So I recognize that, in order to thrive and in order to, get the kids in the right programming, to talk to others who understand what is going on in this new stage of motherhood, my wife is in a community and it's going really well. They all get along together. They go out for drinks way more often than I do with any other dads in my neighborhood. And all is well. But for dads, for the most part, from what I've seen, is that we just kind of latch on to what's going on with the moms, where it's like, the majority of dad friends I have are people who my wife befriended first. She befriends the wife, I hang out with the husband, and then we all have beers in the backyard and let our kids run rampant and trust they're not going to kill themselves. And then we become friends, and that's kind of how it works. Most of the friends I've had from before having a kid don't have kids yet. They're just kind of doing their thing, and they run on very different schedules where they think it's okay to drop in at 8 p.m. And I'm like, no, please, stay away from my house. Go, leave. But we run very different lives now. I'm a very different me than I used to be before having kids. And it's something that we're really trying to capture as best as possible as we look to this huge shift in life, this huge shift for men as they try to figure out who they are in this new capacity. And that's how I came up with this topic. And if this clicker works, I'll go to my actual presentation. It's black. That's not my presentation at all. No. Ooh, that looks good. Okay, the dad within, the man the world rarely gets to see. So, basically I want to make sure that, when I talk about it this morning, it's there's a generalization that I'm using with it because, I'm talking about my experience and kind of thrusting it onto every other dad in Canada, which of course is not the case. Everyone's gonna have their own different experience, but I wanted to make sure that I could do it from a place of authenticity so you guys could understand what's going on in here, and hopefully it translates out to a place where, it makes sense to everyone else. So let's add a little context to this so you guys know where I'm coming from. Like I said, I'm Casey Palmer. My brand is Casey Palmer, Canadian Dad. And I run a blog detailing my experiences as a dad in an urban environment. So in Toronto, not really, people generally in the surrounding area around Toronto, they're like, Toronto is not a place to raise a kid. It is busy, it is loud, it's noisy, there's buildings, you can't cross the road and not expect to get hit by a car if you're not crossing, things like that. So people generally move out to the suburbs around Toronto instead of staying in the city itself. And I thought it was important to be there and be present in the city so that we could make sure that, they have access to all sorts of things around them, whether it's services, whether it's culture, whether it's different kinds of, neighborhoods and families and things like that. So, wait, where did it go? Ooh. Those are the guys I'm raising, those two. So a lot of what I do is for them, and the reason why I write, the reason why I create is with them in mind, which I find is a little different from a lot of people. I am basically putting together a series of stories, videos, content, and everything so that 20, 30 years down the road, they have a guidebook of who they were, how they grew up, the decisions I made as a dad, and hopefully it can go to inform them as they get older and try to deal with their own situations and everything. I want them to never believe that they never I never have their back. I want them to know that all times I'm trying to, from even if I'm, not around decades from now, I'm still giving them something where I can still help them out and still trying to give them advice, even if I don't always verbalize it. And it's a little different for me because of that, because I'm from a Jamaican background. My parents moved up here in the 70s, and then they decided to have kids and give us a better life where it is cold as heck half the year. Like, Jamaica's a dangerous place and everything, and then, there's a lot of lovely parts of Jamaica as well. I've been down a few times, and it has a really good educational system, but it doesn't always translate over here with our immigration laws and whatnot, so they wanted to make sure that they were born Canadian so they can, achieve things. At the same time, though, they do say all the time that I was born in July. They're like, yeah, you were born in a country where, you have cold. You should be used to this already. I'm like, I was born in a summer month. When I was born, when I came out of the womb, I'm like, oh, yeah, I can get used to this. This is good. And then, a few months later, it's like, what did I do? That womb was so warm. But yeah, so I wanted to make sure that, one, I'm writing something that will help them out as the years go on, and two, we're in a very different world growing up now. The kids growing up now have a very different world than the world we had, decades back, where I almost think that in some cases a paper route is like a foreign concept to kids these days. When you have a YouTube, you can go and unbox toys. You can make videos of unboxing toys and make money. You can make videos of you playing video games and make money. You can basically do anything, put it on there, and as long as there's a kid doing it, other kids will look at it and be like, oh, this seems like something I can use the next 6 to 7 hours of my evening watching, because they have a lot of free time apparently. And yeah, it's something where I want to try and build something where they can see themselves immersed in it, maybe pay off their college at an early age or something, things like that. And I'm just trying to make sure that I build the foundation for that so that they can feel empowered from a young age. I want to make sure that they feel like they've had every opportunity to express themselves, so by the time they get older, they're just like, okay, Dad did okay. He did his job of what he was supposed to do as a father. I can give myself a pat on the back as I sit in my retirement home, as they don't want to see me every other week, and it'll be good. That's the plan. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, it's interesting being a dad. Dads, in general, are interesting creatures. We'll spend some time later today talking about dads and how they relate to the rest of society. But right now, from the very, very detailed title I gave you, The Dad Within, we're going to talk about what's in the brain, what's in the mind, what's happening in here, so that the next time you encounter one of the dads in your life in the wild, you know how to deal with said situation. And it is not a cryptic situation of what's going on in here. It's not really that complicated most of the time, but it's good to know. So, it's said that, I've heard it said, that a woman becomes a mom the moment she's pregnant, and a man becomes a dad as soon as the baby comes out. So it's also said that when a mom is pregnant, she's eating for 2 and the dad's drinking for 3. So feel free to take anything I say with a grain of salt. And I'll be honest, I didn't feel a huge bond with my older son when he first came out. It was a new and wild experience. I had just come off of being really involved in Twitter in Toronto for 3 years. So I'd be out 5-6 days a week at events. Don't quite know how my wife stayed married to me in that time, because I'd always be out and doing crazy things, and I'd give her all the kudos for dealing with me through all that. But yeah, it's one of those things where we were at home. We didn't know a lot of people in the area at the time. Sarah was dealing with some postpartum depression as well, which, we were working through that. And it was just one of those things where you have this little baby, as a man, you could only help so much, and that you don't want to overstep, you don't want to get in the way. You can't feed them most of the time. You're just kind of like this guy in the background who's just kind of like, yes, I know I'm your dad. Do you know I'm your dad? And usually the answer is no, because they're 4 months old. They don't know who you are. They're just some guy who's always around. Who are you? You change my diaper from time to time. Great. So yeah, the first 6 months until the first time he smiled at me, it was kind of just one of those things where I was like, okay, I'm here, but is there a bond? Are we together? Do you understand who I am in your life? And it was a struggle. It was just something where, just kind of try to figure that out and go through it. And that was the first point, which I thought was the previous slide, but there we go. Our shift from boys to men is sudden and surprising, not a new role we learn to take on right away. And it's different. I mean, I can understand technically why some men may walk away from fatherhood in those early stages. You know, you might not have the moment to build that bond and really feel that connection with your child. You might not fully comprehend everything that's going to come to you in the years to follow. Like now, my children, I take several bullets for them. I hope I never have to. But if they get in a situation where bullets are exchanged, I will step in the way. And yeah, it's one of those things where, it's a very different experience for dads in that, when you're pregnant as a woman, there's a physical tell, that says, hey, I have a baby. And then the world, for better or for worse, treats you differently because of it. Whereas for men, it's just kind of like, I guess I see it as another day at home. There's no real change from the way the outside world sees it. It's why there's no real push for, people don't take parental leave for dads as seriously in jobs. It's why, guys you might have been friends with for ages and ages don't understand why you can't go out for drinks like at the drop of a dime anymore. Things change. It's a new world. Everything is different. And so a lot of what happens for guys when they become dad is that you have a mental shift of trying to figure out who you are in this new world, and it could take its toll. Going back to the Dad 2 Summit I was at, there was a huge thing on dads dealing with depression and the feeling of inadequacy. Because sometimes dads just don't feel like they're enough. They don't feel like they're doing their job correctly. They don't feel like they're doing all they can for their children, or they are being barred from doing so. And that could be because maybe they are just overworked and not feeling present. It could be because of legal situations where they're not allowed to see their children as much. But there's a real part of it where it's just we have a lot of things that dads are going through, and we just, kind of have to accept and admit that they're there and learn how to navigate through that. But fortunately, or unfortunately, babies don't stay babies forever, and I'm trying to figure out whether or not this is a good or bad thing. Because babies are really portable, you can take them everywhere, things are good, and you have like 3 or 4 things that they really want. They even want to feed, they want to be changed, they're sleepy, it's good. But then they get older and things get a lot more complicated. As I'm sure, yeah, has anyone experienced that? Yeah, just a little, yeah? Okay. So, those babies don't stay babies forever, and as dads, it is our job to stay as involved as possible through it. We're in a very different world these days where we don't just go to work and show up like hours later expecting dinner on the table and say, hey, everyone had a good day? Okay, I'm going to bed later. We're expected for, maybe one of the first times in history to really be involved at home, which is a good thing. I love it. But those kids will react differently to a dad than they will to a mom. And example. So I tried to raise my children to be, nice, respectful, very well-mannered paragons of society as best as possible. And I'm just like, okay, I tried not to expose them in any violence or anything like that, and make sure that they're just nice. I like nice children. That would be a good thing. And I come home from work one day, I'm like, hey, Isaiah, how are you? How's your day? Comes up to me, he's like, gah, and punches me repeatedly in the stomach. And I'm like, I tried so hard. Where did this come from? And I think it's just, I spend a lot of my time, flipping him around and throwing him up in the air and everything. And I guess somewhere in his mind, he's like, I guess it must be okay to beat my dad up. So, yeah, children have a very different way of interacting with me than with my wife, for sure. And now that we expect this level of interaction with dads, I'm going to go forward a couple slides, brings you to my second point. We're all kind of figuring out as we go. And this is for really both moms and dads, but we don't have any books, tools, or templates. We just learn from our children and hope for the best. There's not really anything, there's not a lot out there when it comes down to dads and how to be a dad and all that kind of stuff. We're starting to see more of it come together as more dads talk and more dads start to document their experiences. But I would say that we're still within the first generation of figuring out how to do dadding, how to be a father in the right way, in a productive manner. And we haven't seen a lot of the outcomes of our choices from these days yet. We're still waiting for these kids to grow up and become whoever they're going to be in their adult years and for them to have children as well. So we're still in a figure it out stage, and we'll get there. But as a dad blogger, I feel like I'm uniquely equipped to talk about the evolution of my fatherhood because every thought I've had has been documented in some form, whether by myself or someone else, or my kids in crayon as they replicate things I never wanted to hear outside the home, things like that, because they listen to everything. everything. So I've seen a lot over time that I think every parent starts with this. You start with an idealized view of what you think life is going to be like as a parent. You have hopes, you have dreams, you have all these things that are happening in your head where you're saying, I want my kid to be this, my kid's going to do this, it's going to be this, and this way. And as your kids get older, you realize that you don't know what you were talking about at all. Everything has changed. They have their own opinions and their own ways of doing things, and we have to respect that and make sure that we incorporate it into our worlds rather than fight against it all the time. And now that they're 4 and 2, I'm starting to see a lot more personality. I know my kids a lot better. I know how they'll react in certain situations, and I kind of know what to expect from them overall. And so, with that said, I feel like you go through these stages. We've heard of the terrible 2s. You've heard of the terrifying 3s. Have you heard of the what the 4s? Because I'm in the what the 4s right now, and I think that's it's a fun stage. I say that with a smile plastered on my face as I try to hide all the trauma in my head. But we're just figuring out and it's a new stage where you figure out everything going on. And with those stages, with those new ages come all these new behaviors, new activities, new things that are happening that you're trying to go and figure your way through. And for point 3, which is one of my favorite points, and is going to be the eventual title of my memoir, Daddy's not mad, he's just tired of your crap. Kids come up with a variety of ways to express themselves. If you were here for Alice's talk last night, you'll know that they have several ways of, reasons for misbehavior that we need to be on top of and understand how to have the right tools to deal with them. There are 4 different ways, and I feel like there's a 5th one that dads especially try to use as much as possible, and I call it the screw it technique, where there's having enough going on where this kid is going nuts and having a tantrum and driving you crazy, and you're just kind of like, all right, I'm done, it's over. And I like to tell a lot of new parents, because I write a lot, because I'm very visible with my experience, a lot of new parents ask me for advice. They want to ask, does your kid do this, what do I do with this? And I try to explain it to them like this. Parents are very excited for the first word and the first step. The second word, the second step, not as much. When your kid is then old enough to talk back to you and to run away when you ask them to stand still, you too will question your life choices. And in 2018, in what I like to call the post-spanking era, we're at a stage now where we have to figure out new ways of disciplining our kids and talking to them about things when things aren't going right. And if you're not familiar with spanking, it is a disciplinary invention from the island of Jamaica. I fully believe this. And it's a very useful tool for getting your kids in line. And if you don't think it came from Jamaica, if you want to try and get proof and ask me to refute this claim, I invite you to go down to Jamaica and tell them that they didn't invent it, because I swear they are very good at it. So, in a world where spanking is frowned on, and my parents would not have stood a ghost of a chance of getting my brothers and I to act as well as we do, because spanking, right? Got it? You're still on the... Okay, cool. Parents now have to come up with new techniques. And some parents yell and scream, some parents give timeouts, and like you mentioned, if you were here last night, you'll know some very useful techniques of dealing with misbehavior. And like I said, the screw it approach is very near and dear to my heart. Like, if my kid wants a popsicle at dinner, I will say no. The only way in which I'd give my kid a popsicle before dinner is if his mouth spontaneously combusted and all the water was shut off across the city and he needed something cool to get rid of that fire in his mouth. And I'd be like, all right, have a popsicle. Go ahead. It'll be good. But that usually doesn't happen. So, as much as he's throwing a tantrum, as much as he's saying how unfair the world is, as much as he's telling me how much he really wants his popsicle, I'm going to say no. And at this point, I have 3 choices. A, take it to his level and start a shouting match about how ungrateful he is and that I'll be throwing all the popsicles out to teach him a lesson, seemingly forgetting that I'm trying to reason with a 4-year-old. That never turns out well. You cannot reason with a 4-year-old. It does not work. B, cave, because the path of least resistance is obviously going to have positive impacts on his conflict resolution skills in the future. Never give your kids everything they want, because that's not going to turn out well eventually. I would go with C. Take the Reagan approach and refuse to negotiate with pint-sized terrorists, choosing instead to table the discussion until he decides to act right and stop freaking out over such a ludicrous request. And so, yeah, it's more of the I want him to express himself, but in a productive manner. So I'll let him get it out of his system and get out there and get it all out so that he's like, okay, he'll come back 5 minutes later after his tantrum, say he's sorry, and we'll work it out. We'll come up with a plan for how he can eventually get that popsicle, which usually involves eating a delicious dinner I prepared for him and taking a few bites. My Sarah usually goes with a how many bites approach, and she's like, take 3 or 4 bites, and I'm just like, just eat the food. Show me you want to eat. Show me the food is eaten. When you're full, we'll talk, and you have a popsicle. That's it. I try to simplify everything in a very complex household. Not really working yet, but I'm hoping that it'll eventually everyone will learn through osmosis, and we'll get to a point where it's like, oh, he was right all along. I'm like, I'm just saying. But that and I think it's one of those situations where, it's obvious to us as parents that we have a wealth of life experience above our kids. We've been around longer. And while he is not old enough to appreciate yet that I have all this experience and I'm doing for him what I know is best for him, eventually I'm hoping that he'll come to that understanding. And that brings me back to my fourth and very important point. I have become my father. All the things I'm telling my kid are things I was told when I was younger. These are all things where it's like, oh, you just kind of sit there and you understand, like, all right, yeah, this is what they were trying to communicate all that time ago. And that's my dad over there. And I've convinced now that it takes every set of parents a minimum of 2 kids. 2 kids to understand the family structure of every family in the history of humankind. My oldest kid, I feel for him because I am harder on him, because every first he has is our first. Everything he's doing, we're experiencing for the first time. So we don't know rights or wrongs. We don't know if we react to something one way or another, how it's going to impact. We have no idea. We're basically just trying to get through all this stuff. And, we temper our expectations the more we learn and the older he gets so that we understand more about what he's about. But we're just blindly fording through things and trying to see what will stick when it comes down to raising him. And there's a flip side to that as well, where all his firsts are our firsts. And so they get celebrated. We celebrate those milestones. We're like, oh, first step. Oh, the first time you listen to something that, you're actually supposed to do. That's a real milestone, right? Like, that's a thing? You celebrate that? Yeah? Okay. But all the firsts he has are like, they're well documented. We take video. We have like little, miniature parties at our household and everything. And it's great. Like, he feels celebrated for those little victories he has. And then you get to the second kid, and it's like all his firsts are seconds. So it's at the point now where it's like you want to celebrate them to the same level of gusto and everything, but you've seen this. You've seen this entire thing happen already. You're kind of like, well, okay, good. Yeah, you're walking. Amazing. Oh, you're talking now. You're talking earlier than your brother did. Well, that's cool. Okay, cool. Basically, anything he does, as long as it doesn't deviate from the path of what his brother did too much, we're kind of like, okay, all right, cool. Yeah, you're normal. Amazing. So I started to understand that older, younger kid dynamic, and you start to add kids in the middle and everything, and you just start to understand that as you have more kids, you don't worry as much. You don't worry about what's going to happen with them because you've seen it play out, and as long as it's within your spectrum of expectation, it will be okay. And that's how I better understand the relationship between my dad and myself. So let's go back to that story from the beginning. On my parents' kitchen floor at 27, freaking out because my dad won't listen to me about something for wedding planning. And yeah, I'm the oldest of 3 boys. I am the guinea pig of a father who didn't necessarily have a father himself. I'm not going to air out all of his business in a public forum, but he didn't really have a father figure growing up. He had to step into that role from a very young age for his siblings. And so when he raised kids, he was doing it the best way he knew how, and that was done through doing everything you see as necessary in order to raise your kids. And for him, that was running a restaurant. He ran a restaurant for 20 years, and he would work 12 to 16-hour days, 6 days a week. And that was because that was what he could get with his, level of education, his station in life, his skin color, a lot of things factored in, and that's what he could do in order to make sure he could raise a family and give us everything we needed so that we would want for nothing. And I'm ashamed to say it, now, but I resented him for it. I resented him for not being around as much as I thought he needed to be when I was growing up. I, don't really have too many childhood memories with my dad because my mom and my grandmother were the ones who were around. And it's something you don't really recognize as a kid until you have more life experience. You don't see the sacrifice. All you see is just through your lens. You don't see that your dad hasn't made a choice not to be there. He has to not be there so that you can get everything you need. And I didn't keep those feelings hidden. Like, I remember very clearly, I think that there's two turning points that have mended the relationship between my father and I. One was when we were out for suit rentals for the wedding. I just remember blowing up and, doing the entire, I guess it was 20, 25 years of pent-up emotion. And I would talk about, you were never there, you don't understand me. I don't remember the words. It was pretty juvenile. But I remember just blowing up, and, we kind of wrapped things up, stormed out of the store, went, over to a friend's house, and we just kind of figured it out from there. But I think it's one of those things that we really had to express in order to get to a point where, we understood each other. You understood me more as an adult instead of just the child, and I was growing up and things like that. But the second time was a lot more hilarious. I think you guys will appreciate it. So I've always been as the first, and I think a lot of eldest children fall into this role where you follow rules. You have a lot of rules that are set up and expectations. You're kind of like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. So, went to school, got married, had a grandson for them and everything, and, there was that. And then my youngest brother, who is a colorful character, he's more the entire, he wanted to do the opposite of everything. He never wanted to follow the rules. So he went out. He has his he lives with his girlfriend east of the city. And she has a son from a previous relationship. So now he has a 7, 8, 9, I'm losing track of years. He's about 8 now, but he has a stepson. And, they brought him in, and my parents are warm and loving individuals. They brought him in, and they treat him just as equally as, the grandson that I have for them and everything. And again, I'm not perfect. None of us are. I was kind of like, wait a minute. So you had me go through all this to do this and have a kid for you and everything, and then this other kid comes up out of nowhere, and you guys are cool with it, and everything's good. And that's when my dad said one thing that really just cemented everything and got us to a good point. He's like, Case, with your brother, I'm just surprised it didn't happen sooner. And I was like, oh. And that's when I finally understood that, we're all human. We're all people that have, expectations. We have feelings and everything. And my parents know each of us really, really well. So I'm, the rule follower, and everything worked out there. And my brother is, he's actually, he has a son as well with a girlfriend now. He's settled down quite a bit, but he was always a wild child. He was always the one where it's kind of like, I don't know what he's going to be doing, 2 days from now, much less 2 years. And so the fact that he has now settled down with a family and everything is good is kind of surprising to us all. But we're happy that it worked out. And yeah, my parents were able to give me some good perspective on that. But if you ask me about my dad today, I tell you that he's a remarkable individual. He has developed a, comfortable life for himself after coming from abject poverty in Jamaica. He had to scrape everything together, come up here, take care of his siblings, raise kids, work his butt off. And yeah, now it's instead of me trying to swear up and down that I never want to be like my father, I embrace the things that my father has taught me. The things I've learned from his parenting style, the things I've seen that have made me who I am today are things I embrace and want to include in how I raise my kids, because, if it's, I'm happy with who I am today, and if that is a direct result of my parents' approach to raising kids, then who am I to say no to taking that in and bringing it into what I do as a parent as well? And that kind of brings me to the fifth main point. Not dads. Come on, Casey. Dads are people, just like anyone else, with feelings to hurt, struggles to face, and growing to do in their roles. Let's start treating them like it. And I'll talk about this dads in the greater role of society later on. But really, what it comes down to is the fact that even though we are here, and there's a lot of expectations for dads to be these stoic and concrete characters that are just there to, put the Band-Aids on, take care of things, and be like solid rocks. We're people. Things happen. I saw a lot of dads, I met a lot of stay-at-home dads who deal with different kinds of feelings, whether it's depression, whether it's isolation because they don't really get out to see other dads all that much, or they live in smaller towns in the States where they just don't see a lot of people often. they're people. There's a lot going on inside the cranium of dads that we don't really address or talk about all that often. So I'm just kind of challenging everyone to make sure that we start incorporating more of these elements in the picture. And who knows, maybe we'll get to a point, decades from now where this all seems like really archaic talk and we're like, oh, what do you mean? We don't talk about dads all the time and their feelings and stuff like that. That's totally a thing. So that's kind of the hope, that we can document and deal with enough of this so that we eventually get to a point where it just makes sense. So I'm going to end all this off with, whenever I go to my parents' house now, whenever I see them, I always start a visit with, I'm sorry for everything. Now that I have kids of my own, I'm starting to understand a lot more about things from a parent's perspective, the things you have to deal with, the things you hope for your children, and you get to see them through a lot of things, and you get to evaluate who you are as a parent, and yeah, it's helps you grow a lot to understand what your parents had to go through to get to where you are today and who they are because of it. So yeah, just what goes on inside a dad's mind is a lot. There's a lot happening, a lot of synapses firing off as we try to deal with raising these children. But you know what? I think everyone's on the same page. We just all approach it a little differently. And that's it for another episode of Chatting with Casey as we get ready for the week ahead. With Father's Day around the corner, it's the perfect time to highlight the fatherhood journeys of not only myself, but so many of the dads I've met along the way. Like I mentioned in Kelowna, my story is but one of the plethora of fatherhood stories out there. I hope 2018 can become the start of a long tradition of giving my fellow dads a voice. As for me, it's back to the grind. Father's Day and Christmas are by far my busiest seasons as a dadfluencer, so I've got some hustling to do if I even dream of having things sorted out in time for summer vacation. So have a great one, guys. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to like, rate, share, and subscribe, and I'll be back next week with the second part of my Kelowna keynote called It's Hard Out Here for a Dad. It really is. Bye-bye, guys. See you then.